Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk9159. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we're back with Punk9159. He's a 380 with shadow beard, nerd glasses, and the highly coveted hoodie treat. In real life, he's a well-respected thought leader in crypto with a strong background in investments and research. He's an OG and early-stage Web3 investor that features regularly on one of my favorite pods, the Empire podcast. He also writes his own Substack newsletter called Retrospectively Obvious. Another hoodie punk that I've learned so much from over the years. Please welcome none other than Santiago R Santos to the show. Santi, how are you, man?
Hey, Max. It's great to be here. You're making me shy with that introduction, but I hope to live up to the expectation to make this a useful podcast for your listeners.
Man, it's so humble, dude. Look, I think you've got a bit of a fan base amongst a few of the punks. I think your most recent pod about 10 years of mistakes has been circulating through various sort of group chats. So I think it's served everybody well. So I'd love to sort of get into some of that with you.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think an hour and a half was not nearly enough to document all of the mistakes that I've done over a decade plus of investing in this space. Every cycle, you make new mistakes. But, you know, I love the sport. That's the nature of investing, I guess. If you're not making mistakes, then you're doing something wrong.
Well, mate, welcome to PunkCast. Really sort of delighted to have you on. And maybe we could just start with going into a little bit about your background. Where did you sort of grow up? What did you study? Everything sort of before crypto.
Certainly not art and not art collecting. I'll start with that. My background is in economics, and I studied game theory. So people have seen the movie A Beautiful Mind. It's sort of thinking. It's a branch of economics with some heavy stats component to it, but found it to be really fun, engaging. The professor you never really had to study for the class. You just had to think from first principles, and I really like that. I think it really is useful in investing. You know, you don't have to, you can't memorize things. You can't use things sort of like by the book. You have to be open-minded and thinking in systems and thinking how everything is interconnected, how other people may respond. So it has a component of psychology to it, which I think investing, certainly collecting, is also a social sport. So you have to appreciate that. I think if you're strictly looking from a finance lens, you sort of miss a big component of what is investing, not just crypto, but just generally. But yeah, my crypto journey, I mean, people might have heard it, so I'll bore you with a lot of the details, but it started in 2012. I was at JP Morgan doing investment banking at the time, and really was very lucky to stumble on the white paper and found Bitcoin to be a very interesting use case for moving money cross-border, like the remittance flow. So people from Hong Kong, living in Hong Kong, sending money to Indonesia or the Philippines, or in Singapore to Indonesia or Mexico, the US. These are flows that are non-trivial, and they're quite expensive. And, you know, you're sitting there thinking the internet allows us to do many things. You have these beautiful experiences through Amazon or, WeChat or what have you. But you don't have that with finance. Like, your banking experience is really antiquated. One of my biggest learnings in this journey that allowed me to understand how crypto might be relevant in sort of digitizing finance was actually seeing how WeChat as an everything app really developed in Asia, right? Because this was at a time where most people were very dismissive of everything that was coming out of China. It's like they're just copying concepts that are in the West. And that was sort of the common thinking among investors. Before Alibaba, before WeChat was a huge success, before what is it seen, and some of the Chinese internet giants were just getting started during this time. But I think looking at Asia, places like Korea and China in particular, really offered back then and still today a window into how younger generations are just going to leapfrog traditional finance as we know it and expect finance to be really integrated in a digital manner. And so all of that really ties together when you think about what crypto really allows us to do, right? The DeFi use case for me was very obvious. What I was seeing in something like WeChat as an everything app, right? People want to use everything so natively integrated, combined with all the properties that crypto gives you, which is, not trusting a middleman, being, minimizing counterparty risk. And so that's where the sort of investment banking experience really came. And the clicking of the two really solidified the thesis for something like Ethereum, being more open and expressible at the smart contract layer. And I was lucky to have discovered it early. And over the years, have invested in many projects. Most recently, I guess, was a Parify. And we were really one of the first focused funds in investing particularly in DeFi and being very active on chain. I mean, I think you find time and time again, and I'll finish this kind of ramble with one concept that I've taken to heart now that I've left Parify 3 years ago. Now I'm still doing the same, but just with my own money. It's this idea that crypto is a wonderful space because you can be very close to teams. It's open source, so you can learn a lot. You can be participating in these communities, and also you can use this stuff. And for me, I've always found it very difficult. Maybe I'm the type of person that needs to use things to learn about them, but I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not using these protocols and trying to invest in them. And so that'll tie into later on in how I rediscovered punks and solidified my thesis for NFTs. But it really starts with in how I think about investing in this space, which I'm an investor first and foremost, is you have to use these things. Because if you're using them, you then understand what's working, what's not, what has dependencies. And so that's a core primitive concept that I sort of how I would express my style of investing in the space.
So fascinating, dude. And I think you're so right. I mean, I think traditional investments, or even like, working in some of the corporates that I've been in the past, we talk about products almost in a hypothetical sense, in that, we wouldn't even use some of the products that we would even sell. And you feel that much further away. But, you're right, in crypto, you can get really close to the teams, hang out in discords, actually, and start working with the stuff on chain and forming your own thesis. And I think that, yeah, you're right. I think this is a very sort of special space.
Maybe I'll offer one concept before we move on. It's this idea that you know bi- something like Bitcoin back in the day, very early on, probably to this day, requires you to somehow predict the future, right? Is this going to be a construct that a digital gold that people see value, right? It's basically a commodity based on supply and demand, and so a lot of times as investors, we like to think that we're good investors because we can predict the future. But over time, if you study some of the best investors, I think it's a good investor can be lucky by predicting the future. Something like Uber or something like Airbnb, like that, you can be right once, twice. That's a lot of luck. Requires good timing. But I think the best investors that can systematically repeat their process, that can compound and beat the market time and time again, are the ones that understand the present exceptionally well. And I think crypto today allows you to, again, it's open source, so you can really understand what's in real time. There's no other industry where you can have a pulse of exactly what's going on. And I think most people don't really take advantage of
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there could be, I don't know, some VCs out there that are LARPing a little bit, and not really understanding the space and actually just
that.
investing?
I think it's very obvious when that most of them are not as close, not actively using these protocols. And it's difficult, right? Crypto is it's grown so much. It's hard to keep up with everything. I'm not asking you to be an expert on everything, but certainly if you're going to have an opinion on a protocol, then I think it becomes quite obvious the people that are using it versus not using it. Something, and so yeah,
Mate, I'd like to get your background a little bit deeper. I mean, of all the things you could have studied, I mean, what was it about game theory and economics that sort of appealed to you? Like, why did you choose that path?
yeah. My family really emphasized psychology. My grandma was a psychologist. My dad really loves it. My mom got into it at a later age. And to me, finance was very cookie cutter. I actually think that the most important concept in finance you learn in the first semester, which is understanding that money has a net present value and the time preference. After that, all the accounting nonsense stuff is just sort of really not very useful. Um, Game theory was pretty fascinating because it flexed my brain the most. It was actually the class that I was I felt that I was required to think more, not memorize, not, and it really tied, as I said, everything is sort of the most unified field that I could find at the time I was pursuing like stats, econ, and finance. I'd gotten a bunch of credits from APs, and so to me, it was a very unified field of like combining economics, combining statistics, and also combining sort of this element of psychology. And you're thinking about like concepts like the prisoner's dilemma, right? Or games like tit for tat. If I behave in one way, what's the uh, how is the other player going to respond, and what's the optimal strategy, and how do you maximize payoffs? I think ultimately that for me was a very kind of generalized toolkit to then that I felt that I could apply to certainly finance, certainly investing, and allowed me to see the world in systems. And look, they're very complex, but I think if you can, I felt that economics, strictly as a science, was very, I don't know, it was very, it wasn't very practical because one, most of my economic professors were teaching you risk, or my finance professors were teaching risk, but when you ask them, hey, have you invested in the stock market? Have you taken any risk? They'd be like, no. And I'm like, well, I really found it difficult to learn from someone that hasn't really been like liquidated, hasn't really felt what like, and so, anyways, game theory for me was very fun too, to kind of a break from traditional academia that is very theoretical, not very practical. Economics always, everything you learn in economics is ceteris paribus, like holding everything else constant, or assuming that humans are rational, which they're not, or assuming that markets are efficient, which they're not. And so I think game theory for me was the most felt and still does to be the field that is more comprehensive and more open, and in thinking in a of in as opposed to imposing a certain theory into the world and saying, hey, this works in most cases. Game theory is more like, let's actually, it does the inverse. It's so let's understand how people behave and in these systems, in these games, and then apply, and then kind of decompose it and try to understand certain like theories. But it doesn't try to force a theory into the world. It just observes the world and then tries to make sense of it, if that makes sense.
I mean, would you be able to summarize game theory just so we're all on the same page? I think I've got a version of it, but it'd be good to sort of hear your sort of summary of game theory, just to help others on the call, on the podcast understand as well.
Yeah, one sentence is thinking about how do you optimize payoffs in games. Now, people may look at games and think about Monopoly and poker, and but they're really not. I mean, everything is, when you think about it, everything is a game. When you're interacting with someone else, is a game. You're constantly speculating about something, and that requires you to think of how others are going to behave based on what you do. And it could be applied to politics, like the Cold War, right? If I do this, how's the other country going to respond in a war context or in a negotiating context? It could be applied to business. It could be applied to negotiating with your spouse, who takes care of the kids, how do you so it's applicable to every facet of systems, but also at the individual level. I would say it's a combination of economics, statistics, and sort of math, and then behavioral economics. But all those three combined, I think, make up game theory.
Nice. Well, I've heard you speak on a couple of podcasts before, and this is probably linked as well. And I think you sort of spoke about everybody's so focused on the outcome, but not on the process. But in terms of game theory, technically, if it's a game, is there like a win or lose scenario? And how do you sort of think through that then? Based on decisions, if there is no if the outcome's irrelevant and you need to sort of focus on the process, yeah, how do you sort of think?
That's a great question. I think in game theory, you do try to predict the outcome in terms of sort of in the matrix context. What's the payoff going to be if I do strategy A? You sort of try to predict what the other player is going to respond to what you're doing. If you behave correctly, then does the other player behave correctly? And then you behave correctly, and so you're optimizing the payoff, right, in that matrix. So in some capacity, yes, you're always, I think, making certain assumptions of the future. You have to when you think about the payoff. My point around, you know, optimizing your process is more around how do you go about trying to predict that? What's your process to get to that decision of acting in choosing path A or path B, if that makes sense. You ultimately cannot control what the other person does. You certainly can control which choice you make. And of course, you remain. I think as part of your process, you remain. I think you hope to remain adaptable in a way where you can change your mind about things based on how other people behave, how other people respond, um, and you kind of drop ego in as part of that process, right? Someone that is not willing to, um, that is holding themselves, beating themselves up too hard about the outcome, probably has a high degree of ego. Um, if you invest in something that doesn't work out, and you're beating yourself up too much, it's like, well, there's probably an element of ego there. And as soon as you remove the ego component, you then allow yourself to recognize that a lot of things fall outside of your control. You can't predict or control many things, but you can always predict the choices that you make and how that ultimately boils down to the process of investing or how you conduct yourself in day-to-day life. One of the best books I've read is called Finite and Infinite Games, or Infinite and Finite Games. I think it's Finite and Infinite Games. It's a small book, and it is about game theory, but it is also applicable about life in general. And I think it's this concept of there are two kinds of people that play short-term games and people that play infinite games. And the people that are playing finite games are optimizing for near-term outcomes. And they are willing to go to certain extents to optimize a near-term payoff. And that has consequences that has sometimes can lead to destructive behavior that compromises values, principles in pursuit of a short-term goal because you believe that a game is finite. But I think the best people and the best realization is when you think about these life in general or investing or whatever as or a relationship as infinite, then I think you conduct yourself it changes how you play the game because the game never ends. And so if you take that view and you invert, then I think you do things that never compromise your ability to play the game, and you start acting um, in in a better way that is more sustainable, that is more long term, that values your reputation. Um, and I think you see that and it's applicable to crypto. There are certain people. I'm not dismissive of anon culture. I think anon culture is very important. Someone like Satoshi needed to be anon, has to be anon. I've invested in anon teams. I think they are essential. Sometimes, unfortunately, we live in a world where you have to remain anonymous. Otherwise, you would be prosecuted or you'd be, for security reasons or whatnot. Um, but I think you see people act in the veil of anonymity or pseudo anonymity in very nearsighted and finite, kind of this finite game mentality, very destructive, sort of zero sum. I generally think technology is very expansive and abundant and creates this win-win scenarios where you can maximize your payoff. Where, I'm not saying that everyone wins at the same time. I'm not advocating for we're all going to make it. No, I mean, there is a normal distribution to outcomes. Not everyone can be extremely successful by default. Not everyone can do 100x by default. Um, Not everyone is as smart as they think they are. I mean, there's sort of natural kind of distribution of things. But I do think that most people are thinking in zero sum games, like PvP, player versus player, right? And behave in that way. And I've seen it because I've been in so many cycles. A lot of the players that were in the first cycle are no longer around. They sort of think that they wanted to make a certain number and they check out. But I don't know. I think if you love this game, you never want to stop playing it, and you never want to do things that compromise your ability to play this game. That assumes you love the game. And I think it's important to look at yourself in the mirror day to day and say, why am I here? Why am I playing this game? Because candidly, time is the most limited resource, perhaps the most undervalued resource that we all have. And it is important to just constantly question yourself, am I playing the game that I really want to play? No one is forcing you to play this game. I'm using the word game, and I appreciate some listeners might say this has a negative connotation. When I say game, it sounds playful, it sounds, like not serious. I want to emphasize that when I say game, it is serious, and it is, it is, everything is a game. And I think I want to just make that point because when I say game, most people just think about Monopoly, but it's not, right? As I said earlier.
Man, Santi, you've got some absolute gems here, man. Like I think as you're sort of talking, it just hits home to me too, especially given what's going on right now with this meme coin phrase, right? Like I think, and in some ways when you look at punks as well, and we can talk a little bit more about punks deeply later, but punks are probably seen to carry a high degree of integrity in the space. They've built up reputation and trust over a period of time, and then and I'm probably guilty of it too, is to go out and shill meme coins and have a little bit of fun, not really thinking about, in some ways, it's a short term game. Like deep down, I know that some of this stuff's not going to be long lasting, and it's like a casino in some ways. I don't mean any malice by it, but I know that there are some players out there that are very extractive and very short term focused as well, and that also compromises, I guess, a bit of the integrity and the values of I guess of the brand that they're trying to build as well. Versus, I guess, the deep collectors in the space are signaling themselves in a very, very different way with a degree of abundance, as you sort of say. Another fellow Hoodie Punk 6529, DC Investor, all these guys come with very strong values and principles about collecting, about crypto, and the way the game should be played as well. I think they are also dabbling and having a bit of fun with meme coins as well. But I think I don't know, there's probably a fine line between having fun and then basically getting into that, you know, um, zero sum game for just in it to win it, right? At sort of no expense. Hopefully, everyone could sort of come out with their integrity in space at the end of this.
I want to perhaps make one distinction, which is I'm very competitive. I love to win. I hate to lose. But I also, time and time again, I think in crypto, you are faced with decisions that allow you to maybe play a finite game, to maybe cut corners. And you need to have, I think it tests your values and your principles. And I think that is something that is essential to have them top of mind when you're making these decisions and thinking long term as opposed to short term. Um, but I think the beauty about crypto is that it assumes that everyone is going to act in their best in their self-interest. Anytime you assume that humans will not, it is unrealistic. It's human nature. It's like you can think about it as Maslow hierarchy of needs. You can think about it as just survival mode or more primitive thinking. I think it gets easier perhaps as you make more money, but also it doesn't, right? I mean, people, it's human nature. I think we value uh, we value have sort of status, we value validation, and I think binary outcomes like winning, quote unquote, um, on investing is something that people love to do. I mean, I would be skeptical of anyone that says otherwise. But that doesn't mean that you need to. The way you go about it is the nuance here, and I think that's the most important thing. But I think, yeah, and this is something that I mean, not to go on a tangent, but I am deeply skeptical of projects and protocols that place too much focus on and detracting from the core proposition of crypto, which is it is systems that work without trusting anyone. and actually assuming that everyone's going to act in their best interest. That's the huge novelty of crypto. I mean, solving Byzantium's general problem. It says, how do you coordinate among generals that all want to win? And you do it in a very elegant way. I mean, that basically created a new chapter of game theory of solving a, a problem that was like, people like to detract, people like to, come out ahead, and that's fine. I think this is a concept that I've struggled with over the years, which is people acting on their self-interest doesn't make them um, bad people, doesn't make them selfish. I think it's human nature, and I've come to accept that. I think the way they go about it is something that I like to focus on to take some comfort in the type of people that they are. And focusing on the intention. I think if you don't want to harm people, but you can still be competitive, you can still want to win. And you don't need to apologize for success. And sort of, you put yourself out there and you were taking a lot of risk in the space, and you should be assuming that you're going to at some point be highly successful. Everyone has a high opportunity cost. I think you were talking about Naval. Naval said something really good, which is in this field, you're taking an incredible amount of risk. You should be expecting a huge payoff by taking this amount of risk. It's not all going to come at once. It might not come, not everyone is going to make it, right? They might make decisions that, but, it's the expected value should, in your mind, I think, be highly positive because we're early, because we're taking a lot of risk. And yeah, you hope to, come out ahead, but that's okay.
Just on risk then, and I know you've probably gone into some of this in the previous podcast as well, but like you always talk about risk being thinking probabilities and bets. Like what do you exactly sort of mean by that?
Well, it goes back to this idea that, you know, it's easy to, the common tendencies to think in binary outcomes. They're easy to measure. Ultimately, as humans, we come to this world and are faced constantly with uncertainty, a finite time, death, what other people are going to do, unpredictability of many things, and naturally a binary outcome. Having someone tell us certainty is something that we naturally gravitate to, but it turns out that it doesn't work that way, and you think that thinking in probabilities um, allows you to be open-minded about, again, outcomes, things you can't control, which is most of the things, right? You sort of realize you can't control most of the things you thought you could. Um, and thinking in probabilities, a probability is not static, it constantly changes with new information. I mean, new information is being propagated constantly. And so I think that allows you to never close your mind on events, on new type of outcomes happening, and do sort of a scenario analysis. So I think thinking in probabilities um, forces you to accept the fact that you can't control most things, forces you to constantly process new information and be more open-minded. But ultimately, I think that requires a certain level of acceptance that you have to deal with uncertainty. You have to sort of you sort of you either hate uncertainty and you try to run away from it, and then life sort of like tells you that you can't, and then you come to the realization that you learn to live with under uncertainty, and you appreciate uncertainty, and um, it's like that nagging voice. There's certain things that you have to address, right? That you're neglecting. That is the uncertainty piece. That is the risk component. And I think the more you face it, the more you are aware of it and you observe it and you appreciate, look, there's sort of known unknowns, there are unknown unknowns, and you build as much margin as possible to, again, never compromise your ability to play the game in an infinite manner. Then I think that's sort of all you can really do is prepare for the unknown and the uncertainty. Like, you've been in the space for a while. Like, every time you think that you figure out the space, crazy stuff happens. And, best you can do is to build margin of safety and never, certainly speculate, but don't gamble. Gambling is going to compromise your ability to play a game. Going levered long on something and putting yourself out there and being liquidated is gambling.
YOLO. Yeah.
You've always going to have in bull markets, like, last couple days, you've had coins go down 30, 40, 50, 60%.
Yeah. I gotta say the last cycle, right? I think I thought, coming out of that last cycle in the last bull market, I thought it was a genius. And I think the bear market handed it to me. And I think through that sort of process, started looking for answers. And I think when I listened to your podcast, it just it started hitting home that I didn't have a process. I was basically just gambling and got lucky. Um, and so this cycle, I'm trying to be a little bit more thoughtful and systematic about it because I, I think it was you know, I think it was the book that you also referred as well. I think it was Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke, and I think she was talking about poker playing and the like. It's like, well, some people go through life and they might not get the right outcome, but it might have been the right decision, and they just won't try again. And so the question is like, well, how do you continuously make the right decisions day in, day out? And then over time, extrapolate that out, you should be getting by probabilities a good sort of outcome. And I know that in my sort of experience in the last run, even now through meme coin season, I'm just falling back to bad habits. I'm definitely sort of gambling and I'm not being thoughtful about why I'm sort of doing things. What is my sort of thesis behind things? Probably the more short term sort of side as well. So I think a lot of stuff for me to work on too.
Well, let's dig into that. I mean, I think I'll give you an example very quickly, and then I'd like to dig into why you think dabbling on meme coins is gambling, because I think there's a way to do it without with speculation in mind. So NFTs, right? We had in the prior cycle, 2017, we had crypto kitties. Really fascinating, took off. Similar to the early days of the internet, you're like, these are pictures of cats. People dismissed them. They laughed them off. They congested the Ethereum L1 blockchain, and people wrote them off. They're like, these are never going to work because it's preposterous to assume that, like, they just can't work in a state where you have, um, you know, very early infrastructure that doesn't support these type of mainstream collecting use case. Right? Collecting is a sport. It's people love to do it. Um, I think if you're thinking in binary ways, you would have dismissed NFTs then and there. You would have looked at that case study and just said, case closed. NFTs are dead. And that wouldn't allow you to discover NFTs in the last cycle, 2021, 2022. And you would have looked at the Punks Discord. It was bumping. And I initially minted some Punks, never thought much of them. Revisited my thesis when it was G Money and another person said, hey, you ought to look at the Discord. I mean, there's some smart people here. This space is bumping. Like, you should reconsider your thesis. And it was actually G Money that pounded the table weeks after weeks. And I was considering buying an ape punk. I should have. I didn't. $1,000,000 at the time felt crazy for an NFT. Now you have 16 million, aliens like popcorn. And I, I don't want to say, look, I've never been the fastest to develop a thesis. Maybe there are people that are genius and saw Bitcoin at once and saw Ethereum and saw the shining light and said, this is it. This is the end state. Went balls to the wall and, have held, never touched it, strong hands, diamond hands, whatever. I'm not one of them. My thesis has taken a decade. It's still in process. I'm still adapting. I take the view that we're in a time we're sort of privileged to be living in a moment where technology is and the compounding rates of innovation are just such that I'd rather stay open-minded. I'd rather keep tabs on thesis and everything is a hypothesis. As Mark Andreessen says, strong convictions weakly held. I believe in NFTs. I believe in something like Ethereum. That probably changes because maybe there's another blockchain that doesn't exist that may win the scaling wars or whatever. But revisiting thesis for punks was instrumental for me to really then invest more of my money in that process. I will credit because it was smart people in my network that smarter than me that brought it to my attention, like independent information nodes that were like, hey, you ought to listen to this, you got to pay attention. And I think thinking in probabilities was, whether you made money with CryptoKitties, you lost money, whatever. Some people might have said, you know what, no, like, I don't want to touch NFTs again. Um, and you see a lot of with TradFi guys that come in late in the cycle, YOLO in, and then lose some money, and they never want to hear about crypto ever again, and then become super vocal and negative against it. Yeah, and yeah, you know. Um, but I think it would be dumb to be thinking in in that rigid mindset. NFTs and Ethereum. Okay, NFTs and Solana, very different type of buyer, very different type of community, because transaction costs are really low. Meme coins and Solana very different than in Ethereum. But I want to go back to something you said, which I find interesting, which is because much like you, dismissed meme coins for a while, a long time. And maybe a lot of it was coping, right? Because God, all these people making all this. We're trying to reinvent them. We're trying to reinvent the financial system of the world, and here comes a dog coin that like is worth more than DeFi. It's like, come on, guys. It's like, but who am I to have a strong opinion about it? People are having fun and people find value. Then isn't Bitcoin the ultimate meme coin? Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I think everyone has very strong convictions about their worldview, which is fine. The problem is when you try to impose that on other people, which you should never do. But I want to go back to something you said and get your perspective. Like, why, in this day, do you think you're gambling on meme coins versus speculation?
Um, I just think I just sort of feel like it's getting super frothy right now, and I think and maybe I am coping. I did get into WIF early at like 5 million and sold that at 15 and thought I was a hero. um, and so, and the thing is, once I exit, I'll never get back in. And I'm looking at the FTV now, and I'm just like crying. And so I'm and it's just I think it's just spurred like this whole wave, and I think that's where the attention is right now. You just have to play, right? And I'm curious about the space, but I struggle to sort of have a lot of conviction on any of these. Like some of them were, they might have a bit of a nice narrative to start off with, and you triangulate and sort of see who's behind it, and all the other people that are sort of in. But it's just hard to really figure out what is that recipe that really makes a meme coin a meme coin. Um, and so, Whiff was a really interesting one. Bonk was an interesting one. The one that just launched the other day, Boom, another one too. I mean, I bought a secondary at 50 million and then sold out very, very quickly at a 2x or something like that. And I didn't want to look back. And it was mostly because it was gambling for me. I didn't do any work on any of these. I think there's just so many of them that are popping up. It's more about spray and pray as opposed to, hang on, let me have a look a little bit deeper about this. Is there any real substance about it? And obviously, like when you go into BOEM a little bit more, there is a little bit more behind it. But for the most part, it just feels like it's the same cookie cutter type launches now. It's like send salt to this address and da da da, and let's see what will cook. And I think everyone's just sort of playing that game at the moment.
Why? I mean, look, this happened to me too. You sort of close an investment and you never want to look at the price because you're too afraid of saying, God, I left, sold for 5x, could have been a 100 bagger. And I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that it doesn't hurt, that I do it as well. We all sell out of positions too early or too late. And again, I mean, you're never going to get timing right, but you didn't lose. I mean, back in my mistakes, like, yeah, probably would have been better off not selling any ETH and just not doing anything and like riding into the sunset. But you do these things. And at some point, my dad told me, listen, this is after the 2018 crash. And he said, what are you so depressed about? I'm like, wow, God, I mean, I didn't sell the top. And he's like, are you an idiot? You didn't lose money. You're up. And the mind just plays weird tricks, right? Um, you've outperformed. Think about the IRR on WIF or some of these things. Like, it's really crazy to think that, but like, I think that this is where studying history is instrumental to understanding and appreciating that these type of returns are abnormal. Certainly, you're taking a lot of risks, but let's put it this way: if you 2x, I don't know, that seems like this was a very short trade in like a matter of weeks or days. You do that constantly, you will be the best investor of all time. Statistically speaking, you won't be. I think. I mean, no disrespect. I just think, is that going to be me, right? And so, am I coping? To some extent, but that's, you want to play the game, I think you need to think long term. If you do 2x on everything that you touch, you will be the best investor of all time. I also certainly agree there's power law distributions. There's going to be, you need to get the 100x's right with size, with conviction. But, I mean, rule number one of investing is not lose money. Rule number two is don't forget rule number one. Because if you lose all your money, you can't play the game. You haven't lost your money.
I have.
Oh,
I've told
okay.
you about. I've told you about the
haven't lost.
wins. I've told you about the
Well,
wins.
you
I haven't
haven't
told you about the
lost all
losses.
your money. You're still.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
sounds like you're
I'm
still
in
playing the game.
Yeah, I'm still playing.
Yeah, you're still in the game.
Yeah.
Like, let me put it this way: how many more years ahead do you have as an investor?
I don't know. Hopefully 5.
Assuming you have a productive life in mind, you know, the average life expectancy. I don't know.
30,
how
40
many more
years. 30, 40 years,
Okay.
maybe.
In that time, you've been able to identify this early movement that is called crypto, that has less existential risk than 10 years ago, but has still probably incredible upside. What's going to matter in 1 or 2 years? What happens in 1 or 2 years? I think, do you want to play this cycle perfectly and maybe do things that, might put you in a really uncomfortable spot? Or do you want to play it where you can play every cycle for the next 30 years? If you do 2x every cycle for 30 years, what kind of return is that? What kind of compounding is that? Yeah, it's huge, right? I mean,
How do you
everyone
think
might say, yeah.
how do you think about size, Santi? Like when you say, find those opportunities with a little bit of conviction, you need to get the size.
As a percentage of my portfolio, like, I think it's, I mean, I mostly do private investing. That's mostly what I do. I do have a liquid part of my portfolio that, it's not small, but um, I rotate into privates. I just like meeting founders. I like meeting early. I like to give them lifeblood that is capital and maybe some advice, which is mostly not getting in the way, not being annoying. Um, but it systematically, I invest a certain amount in every project. And if I'm not willing to make a position at least 1% of my portfolio, then it's probably not enough conviction. That doesn't necessarily mean in liquid context, that doesn't necessarily mean I'll make it a 1% position overnight. Something that I've taken as part of my process is something I heard from Stan Druckenmiller, one of the best investors of all time. Um, he said, look, if I like something, if I have an idea, I'll put on a position. Small, and then do more work. And based on that, I might cut the position or size it up. I think most people wait too long to put it. I've fallen trapped to this, right? Coming from a investment banking analysis or private equity or venture, which is analysis by paralysis, right? You try to cover all your bases. Again, you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. Your model is wrong from day one. All you can do is do some sort of estimation of understanding what are the 1 or 2 key drivers that are going to determine the outcome, right? I always like to ask founders, what do you need to get really, really right? Because you're going to get so many things wrong. I don't tell them this, but like, what do you need to get really, really right? 1 or 2 things to win. And when I hear a compelling answer, I'll make it 1% of my portfolio. And that involves a certain check size. With liquid positions like meme coins, like WIF, I was buying early on, much like you, and I kept adding, or Bonk, I kept adding, because my thesis is meme coins, Solana is a retail chain, and meme coins should do well in Solana this cycle. None of this financial advice. That's just my thesis, and the best ones should outperform Sol. At some point, I will rotate back into Sol. I'm not there yet, even though the last couple of days have certainly tested my thesis and conviction. But the hardest thing is not to do anything. I think you always want to do something because these markets never close, and it's not a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday kind of thing. So yeah, sizing is one of those things where you want to. It's hard because sometimes positions grow to a point where they're very uncomfortably large. That's just a matter of. I think this goes back to your style and your preference. I think I'm a big advocate of optimizing for mental clarity and and I think you want to put yourself in a position where you will be able to think more clearly, and and sometimes that involves, insulating your lifestyle. It involves, if you can change your life. If you can recoup principal, and then write out the rest. It's a matter of style. No one can really tell you what's perfect, but I've sort of never regretted taking money out and living life, so to speak. It's nothing wrong with that, because I've never regretted. My parents are getting older. I've never regretted spending money traveling with them and owning my time, because I know that I'll never regret spending money with them, even if it involves missing out on an incremental, not timing the absolute top of, whatever.
Do you look at your portfolio in terms of, allocation, in terms of, what sectors you'd want an allocation to? So, for example, DeFi, DePIN, meme, whatever it is. Do you have that perspective and then try and look for fillers, or do you just go whatever best deals that I can sort of get that I have conviction on? I'm just going to go in. Like, how are you sort of thinking about allocation that way?
I have some rough rubric of the type of percentage that I want to make: DeFi, AI, gaming, NFTs, infrastructure. Yes. Now, I'm not super hard and fast on it, but it's just a general guideline. But the nice thing about just managing my own capital is that, one, I don't have to explain anything to anyone. I can be very agile. And at this point, I want to back people that are doing interesting things. So that's my kind of first priority. I am mindful of, hey, I'm over allocating to a particular vertical, but I'll make exceptions. There's always exceptions, right? If there's a fantastic builder, I'll just back him. But yeah, I'm not like super hard and fast on that.
Gotcha. Man, I could probably go on for days, but maybe one last question before we get back onto punks. And I think you touched on a previous one too, but it just sort of felt like it wasn't a hard and fast rule. Like, how do you think about exits? I think I'm pretty okay with getting into positions and buying. Um, but how do you sort of think about exits for these things? Because I was listening to you on your podcast as well. Sometimes you won't even exit; you'll just hold and you'll update your thesis and you'll add to some of those positions at sometimes too. How do you sort of think about exits? Are you looking to sort of time some of those things?
I'm of the mind that I'm never going to be able to time it systematically, ever. It's impossible, because I can't control what the market does. And I think, again, probabilistically, after a certain type of return, what's the probability of. So I'll give you a very concrete example, probably the most useful in my process, because I invest in both liquid and privates. Say I invested in an early stage um, gaming platform. That investment has done a 10x, 50x. It's now worth over $1 billion FTV. I can take profit, and one, in isolation, the probability of that 50x doing another 10x is lower than another project I'm looking at a $10 million seed round valuation, with a great team, great fundamentals, great, I like it. So the choice there becomes easier for me, where I rotate capital from something that I've already done a huge return on, that's probabilistically I may not. The opportunity cost, I guess, is um, the probability of me outperforming is higher if I take profit there and invest in the earlier stage company, because 10 going to a billion, or 10 going to 100, that's a 10x, versus a billion going to 10 billion. How many projects out there are 10 billion gaming related? Zero. Zero. It requires me the things that need to happen for that project to grow 10x, that is already at a billion, are, I find it harder to wrap my head around, versus a project that is at 10 million or 20 million going to 100 or 150 or 500. And so that crystallizes when I take profit, especially on projects that I've invested over the years, and I can take some profit invested, because my game is really having capital to support founders at the earliest of stages. That's what I enjoy the most. I think that's my edge, and I stick to that. Unfortunately, crypto is that type of industry where it's a liquid venture, where you're a venture, long-term investor, but you can also be a high-frequency trader. You're forced to be both. You have to think. You have to think going into a position more practical for people that might not be investing in private. So I appreciate, that's most people just do liquids. I think going into an investment, you have to have some sort of scenario thinking of your exit targets in mind. I'm not of mind that you should hold these things forever. There comes a time where the opportunity cost is really high, where things get out of hand, where it becomes, you have that feeling where it's, gravity will pull, like mean reversion. If everyone's doing 10x every day, like to your point around meme coins, well, that's not normal. It's not, and things come back to gravity, right? Things come down to earth. So I think it's having, for Ethereum, for instance, I had a thesis when I invested. It was like, all right, well, maybe this, goes to 1 billion or whatever. That might be a good outcome. I didn't update my thesis. Sold a lot. Also was influenced when Vitalik sold. I panicked. Why? What has changed, right? And so I think it's this idea of, you don't necessarily have to react in the moment. I think you have to respond. Responding takes time. You update your thesis. You look at, you poke around Discords, you see what's happening. Transitioning a bit into the NFT conversation, NFTs have had a hard time over the last 2 years. They're liquid assets. They're kind of meant to underperform in both up and down, right? They, by virtue of illiquidity, they're more speculative. But, the floor at the top was 125 because I literally bought one punk with a bandana. I timed the top. I bought one punk floor that I liked with a bandana and a beard for like 125 ETH. That was 500K. Still holding it as a reminder, and I look at it every day. It's like I walk, I have it in display. It's sometimes nice. I mean, if you're not laughing at your mistakes, I don't know. I look at it and we can transition more to NFT discussion because there's a difference between investing and collecting. I didn't buy this punk trying to flip, which is know the game you're playing, right? Are you an investor or you're not a collector? Some people in the NFT space have a crisis of identity crisis of sorts.
So Santi, what was your first NFT then? Do you remember?
Oh God,
You've been around for a while,
I
right?
think it was a Crypto Kitty.
The Crypto Kitty. Okay.
Yeah, it was a Crypto Kitty. And then I bought like some Bitcoin NFT. It was like this artist from Japan gave me an NFT because I bought some of their physical art and attached an NFT to it. That was probably my first.
Was it the on XCP kind of party? One of those ones?
No, I don't think so. Okay. Maybe. I forget. I'm probably
that's okay.
But it was probably a Crypto Kitty.
Yeah.
And then punks.
And what did you make of NFTs at that point in time? You were just experimenting, or when did you
super small percentage of my portfolio? I like collecting Pokemon cards. I've always been a collector. I love Legos. I think I have one of the largest Lego collections out there. Seriously. I collect rare books. I just love history. You go back to my parents' house, there's a bunch of shit in boxes. So naturally, NFTs are really nice. I'm like, oh, but it felt, I never wanted to, just getting rid of your ETH is hard, right? I mean, it became harder and harder over the years. I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to be spending these things, right? I'm not paying coffee with Bitcoin or ETH. So it was just kind of like a small dollars thing, fun experiment. Never really thought much of it. It was kind of hard and clunky to buy, so it's way easier now.
Did you say you claimed punks?
Yes, yeah.
So what was your story then? Like, how did you find about punks, and how did you know sort of to claim? Like, what was your discovery process?
I'd like to take more credit than what I should, but it was just someone that I really trusted in this kind of. It was like, hey, check this out. You should take punt on it. It was like whatever. I didn't think much of it. And then minted it.
How many did you claim?
Not like a huge amount, but a few, I guess.
Do you still have them, or
Um,
you've sold them off, exited them?
yeah, no, I still have 'em.
Okay, gotcha.
Publicly I displayed too.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. Okay, so fast forward to, I guess, your punk now. So it's 9159. Yeah, this was you bought him in April 11th, 2021. Just before I think the ball for NFTs and punks sort of came along. What made you sort of buy 9159, and what was your sort of decision making process around traits?
I wanted to buy something that looked like me. And by luck, I stumbled upon hoodies. And I love hoodies. I mean, I tweeted about this when I bought it. I consulted with someone like G Money was instrumental in convincing me to revisit punks. He's like, you ought to look at it again. I was going to buy an ape. I like this idea of aping into things. DeFi was hot at the time. And, you're like, all right, well, a degenerate ape. I like this ape. But spending like $1 million just felt like it was a bit much, I guess. Um, and the hoodie one was I liked it. I had a beard. I have a beard. I've had a beard for the last since my second year at JP Morgan Investment Banking. We're not supposed to have a beard, but I already had a job lined up after that. And I was like, fuck it, fuck the establishment. I'm gonna have a beard because this represents my independence, even though I'm tied here to the chain to the desk. I love JP Morgan. I'd do it again, but to me it was like a reminder that I'm still somewhat independent, but I'm really not.
Did they have
I've
dress
always had a
standards?
beard.
Did they have dress standards back then? Like
Oh, do they have what?
dress standards, you had to be clean
Oh
shaven.
yeah. Suit and tie every day. You
Oh
have to
wow.
clean shave, suit and tie. Yeah. No, this is in New York, like 38th floor, like the financial sponsor group, like as investment banking as it gets. But I sported a beer my second year, and it was like, sometimes I would get these looks in the elevator. Anyways, I bought something that looked like me, and hoodies, and I tweeted about it. I think hoodies are very emblematic of like hacker culture. Of course, like people think of Zuckerberg and hoodie, but I love hoodies. Keep you warm. It's comfy. I like them. Um, and I felt that they were underrated. Even though there was like 256 hoodies or so. I felt it was underrated trade. But at the time, I was like, oh, this feels kind of. The other traits were, of course, everything's very subjective in art and everything, but I felt that hoodies were kind of underappreciated. First, and I started funny because I selected a few. I actually what is it, 6529, my brother hoodie punk. What's his number?
Yeah,
I always get it wrong.
6529. Yeah.
He bought it like weeks after, a month after I did.
Yeah.
I think in May. I had bookmarked his punk, my punk, and another one. All hoodies with a beard. His is a lighter tone to it. Most people always confuse us. Most people at some point thought we're the same person.
It looks exactly the same, but he's got a frown. That's the only
He's
thing.
got a frown. Yeah.
One pixel
And,
was the big difference there.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just I bought the one that I thought looked more like me. And funny because I was gonna go buy it. It was a Saturday, and I told my parents. I was like, my dad was like, "You're gonna drop what on this thing? Like, you're crazy." And they have a small percentage of they invested early on in me, and so they have a very small percentage of my fund, family office, so to speak. And he's like, I don't want to participate in this. I was like, oh, fine, I'll buy it with my money, so no problem. My mom was like, no, like whatever, yeah. My mom now has my punks as her like WhatsApp profile picture or whatever. And good right click save. But yeah, I bought it for 79.99 ETH. Funny enough, I bought it from a guy that bought it the same day. Someone front running me without knowing that I was going to buy it. He bought it for like 50 something ETH. And I paid 20 ETH more. Like, this guy made the best return ever. He made 20 ETH in like 6 hours. Yeah. Well, back then, yeah. And but at the time, 79 ETH was like, I guess it was like
170K. I've got the your punk page up.
What was it? It was like 100 and plus, right?
171,000. So
a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
It was a lot of money.
Back then, I think the floor back then in April would have been like 20 odd, maybe.
Yeah, so I mean, hoodies were trading at certainly a premium, and then the hoodies I started tweeting about. I don't want to take credit that I was like, and then 6529 bought his, and he reached out, and then a few people reached out. It's like, oh, let's make. And then A16Z Eddie, I think, had a great post around hoodies as a for the number of like the rarity is not as much as others, but they trade at a premium. So I like to take some credit that I was early on the hoodie, um, discovering the hoodie trade and bringing it back to prominence. And so that was like my first re-entry, and I have that as, and I like to think of that as like my first true purchase with intention, with because it was a lot of money, and it really I remember going through this process of God, am I really going to spend 80 ETH on this thing? And it's a liquid. Like, I just know how liquid things behave. And I allowed myself and I saw it as an experiment. And I think talking about sizing, I think it goes well in crypto to experiment with things in your respective proportion, right? Whatever that may be. But it never hurts to experiment. And I said, I'm going to buy this. It's an experiment. Worst case, I'm probably never going to be able to sell it because it's going to be tied to my identity. And it has, right? Um, but it was a very useful exercise to think about on-chain identity, to think about, I think I gained way more followers. It just became a nice thing. And I use that for every conference, for everything. It's just, um, I should have bought more hoodies.
Dude, your one's super clean and definitely highly sought after, but sort of definitely out of my grasp as well. But puts you in great company as well. I mean, we mentioned 6529, these guys in there, DC investors in there, Pirate Crimo as well. So a whole bunch of guys that are giga brains in the space, and was a huge signal for those wearing a hoodie punk. What was your fundamental thesis back then? Like, I'm curious to hear what I mean. That was relatively early on.
The process, this was before Visa. My process was listen to smarter people, surround yourself by smarter people. To me, it was listening to someone like G Money. It was listening to him. He pounded the table. I was thinking of hiring him to verify. I thought he was really smart in the NFT world, and you could certainly look at the collectible markets, wine, watches, cars. I mean, auction houses, and that was the thesis. Um, it's a good reminder of the novelty of crypto, which is digital property, digital scarcity. And punks naturally are, for me, the OG NFTs. I mean, certainly people can point to some Bitcoin, rare Pepes, what have you. But, in a chain that is, at least for Ethereum, to me, it's OG.
Yeah, but
And the nice thing about it is it doesn't promise anything, no utility, nothing. It's just, it is a benevolent good, right? It's this idea of scarcity and no utility brings more utility. I guess, like, the fact that it doesn't have utility is sort of the point. But I think it was a moment in time of a snapshot of very emblematic of the space of crypto culture, of Web3 culture. We don't call it Web3 anymore, whatever, crypto culture. And I think I wanted to have one being in the space. It felt like a bit naked in my digital identity, not having a punk. And
why
certainly
is
G
that?
Money made it very clear. Well, I think it was G Money's like, how can you purport to be like a crypto OG, whatever, be very active in the space? You're not gonna have a punk, and you're like, well, when you put it that way, I guess I got, but you sort of cornered me here, and I have to go and buy one. Felt like a lot of money. I mean, it still is. So, anyways, and I didn't go. Here's what else. I never went into it thinking that I was gonna flip it. I'd said, God, it feels like a lot, but I actually borrowed against my ETH stack to buy this one. And part of it was in hopes of saying this outperforms ETH. I borrowed like super small amount, so like, on chain, just took a bar like to make sure that I wouldn't get liquidated, and then I repaid that loan very quickly. But I didn't want to. That to me was sort of like I'm not spending, I'm kind of borrowing. So it's like I still have exposure to ETH, and if ETH keeps running, I'll borrow USDC, and hopefully, if ETH does it 2x, and pay for itself there, kind of thing. By the way, I would not recommend people to do this at all. Like taking lever. This is also something that was tracking farther down the cycle is like how much leverage people were going at, like inspecting wallets of purchases and saying like, out of 10 purchases, how many of these are all leverage? And a lot of them were, and so that was not a good sign, right?
Santi, I thought we were thinking in bets. Punks are going to 10x from here, mate.
Oh man, no. I listen, man. I can pontificate all I want here, but I'm hopefully people appreciate. I'm not perfect. This process is ever evolving, and I've done things that, would I do them again? Absolutely not. Was I lucky? Absolutely. We're all even. Yes.
And I know that you've been quite the sole Solana maximalist now, which some ETH maxis with punks as well might be a little bit upset about. But I mean, you're pretty bullish on Solana and everything else, and NFTs, but you still come back to a CryptoPunk. Like for you, like what does it symbolize for you?
I think I'm not a maximalist. I'll challenge that. I'm very excited about Solana because I'm seeing the adoption. Gosh, who would have thought when fees are negligible, what happens? Well, yeah, things that didn't work when people paid $7, $50, $1,000 gas, unrealistic, right? So it's really refreshing to see that happen in Solana and other chains too. But Solana, I think, is one where you also, I think most people also sort of froze in time their thesis on Solana when SBF, like FTX collapsed, or even pre that, like some of these apps were not great, right? The apps that you have today, Tensor, Jupiter, they're delightful. I mean, they're better than Web2 apps. I mean, there's less friction. And so this is something like the space is moving so fast that I would encourage people to constantly revisit and go and test these things. For me, it was someone saying, go play in Jupiter. I'm like, okay, this is an app that I would actually send a newcomer into the space. Go try Backpack. Okay, most of these are my bags. I get it. There's bag buys, but there's other apps, right? And so I think naturally, when there's a wealth effect in Solana, and you saw it in Ethereum with DeFi, with airdrops, people like to collect, right? People like to have mementos of, the first NFT you bought represented maybe your first gain of X or Y, or that airdrop you rotate into an NFT. Ultimately, NFTs have emotional cachet that an ERC20 or a normal token doesn't have. A governance token doesn't have the same emotional cachet power than NFT, which is why I sweep floors. And for a random listener, they'd be like, "What the hell? This guy janitor?" No, I've sweep floors, but I've been more like mindful and thoughtful in what I want to buy because I'm a collector. I'm not speculating on the floor. I remind myself that I'm going to buy these things and probably never sell them, and I buy them because I look at them and I enjoy. I get utility out of it, but I'm not.
What do you collect, Santi? Like, what do you like collecting in space?
Well, a lot of things, but I've actually never sold NFTs. I've only sold one, and it was an NFT that I got gifted by a project that I invested in called Nifty Island, and I got this like rare island. And they came to me and said, one community member wants to buy it. I'm like, you're not supposed to sell things that you get as a gift, but they're like, no, you should sell them. I was like, okay. But no, I sold that and I bought that hoodie punk. Sorry, I bought that bandana punk for 125 ETH and top the top the highest floor. 125 ETH, yeah. But I've never sold anything else. So like I was part of Pleaser DAO, so we bought the Uniswap NFT. I was bidding on the M1, the Snowden 101, the Tor 101, and then I went out and bought the Wikipedia NFT and Mac computer from that was a Sotheby's auction, and then that was contributed in a Pleaser DAO. The Wu-Tang album. So
more the cultural significant ones that are at the point in time and that actually have a little bit of meaning.
Exactly. And then in Solana, I like a few, Mad Lads, Tensorians. I'm an investor in Backpack, so Mad Lads is developed by their team. Tensorians, I love the team. They're kind of cute. I bought like a hoodie Tensorian. I need to like it. Aesthetically, I'm a sucker for that. I don't buy things that I don't like. I got gifted. Actually, I did sell one other. I sold a Bored Ape that I got gifted, and I was like, I don't like it.
Why didn't you
So
like it?
I don't know. I just didn't like it in my wallet. It was like aesthetically not pleasing. I'm a sucker for that. I'm sorry, guys. Like, and I'm sorry. I really appreciate the gift, but I just didn't want it to be a part of my wallet. I'm really sorry. I probably shouldn't have done that, but um, and then not NFTs. I'm probably the rarest collector of Harry Potter first editions and illustrations. I love Harry Potter, and so I've gone out and bought like first first copies or proofs signed by J.K. Rowling, annotated, which are super rare to find by J.K. Rowling. I bought from very close friends of J.K. I've assembled a collection that is on display. Well, I don't have it in my house. I have it on. It's actually in London.
Dude, I didn't even know that was a thing until I was traveling through London
Yeah,
last
rare
year through
books.
the
Rare,
British Museum.
dude.
Yeah,
Rare books. Rare books are probably the most underappreciated thing out there by
crazy.
far. By far, like
How much is
people.
like a Harry Potter signed edition worth now? You think?
101, the highest it's been. It's like there was an auction in Houston that went. I think it was Heritage Auctions. It went for $500,000.
Wow, that's
First
crazy.
edition signed copy, J.K. Rowling. Yeah. Now it's come down, I think, a bit. It depends on the quality too. There's like a whole certain things. It's not easy to kind of. It's not as easy to inspect on as NFTs, right? In terms of traits, but I probably have the only collection of Harry Potter books that are inscribed by J.K. Rowling, and I bought him from a very close friend. And what I love about these and it's unique is that it shows the insecurity of the author, where it's like in one of her notes, she's like, I like page 200 or so of Chamber of Secrets. Like, keep reading, it gets better. I know this is a terrible book, they're never going to go anywhere. It's kind of really rare to see that. And I love encapsulating that moment. It's like, these are probably the only ones. And the people that I buy from, they're based in London and they kind of sort of see everything in the Harry Potter world, J.K. Rowling world. I love Harry Potter. And I'm not gonna. They like selling it to me because they know I'm not gonna sell. I bought the first illustration of Dumbledore, the second illustration of Dumbledore, because the first illustration in the cover of the Philosopher's Stone looked like a magician, and J.K. complained, was like, "This is not like. Did you guys read the fucking book? Like, this is not Dumbledore. This looks like a Joker." And then they did a reprint of the cover, and I have that, and it's a beautiful picture of Dumbledore in the Philosopher's Stone. And then I bought the illustration for Azkaban, which I love. Um, and I actually try to convince him to make them NFTs,
Yeah.
and we're in that process, just to
What
encapsulate the purchase moment. Yeah. So
what do you do
anyways,
with these things? Do you just have it
my goal
stored
is
and
to
vault in the
collect.
house or something? Or
No, public display. Everything
yeah,
that I collect at some point, I want to display publicly for
yeah,
people to consume. These things are not meant to be stored.
yeah,
They're meant to be enjoyed by everyone.
yeah. Ha-
Um,
Have you
that
been to?
yeah, that's the beauty of the NFTs. Anyone can see them.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, in the art world and other places, you can't, right?
yeah,
But my goal is to continue to collect. So, for instance, when I talk about rare books being totally underappreciated, probably the most undervalued things.
yeah.
Let me ask you a question. What do you think is the most impactful piece of literature of our generation?
Phew. Most impactful. Um,
Yeah, emblematic.
well, I mean, now you sort of talk about Harry Potter. I know that it's. I mean, I'm not a fan
I mean, I know
personally,
it's a
but
rhetorical question because we've been talking about Harry Potter for the last 10 minutes.
exactly.
But can you think of
But
any other
no,
influential?
uh,
Exactly.
no. Um,
Like cross swath of the world, like Harry Potter.
yeah.
And
I mean,
so I look at that and I said,
yeah,
it's totally undervalued. Let me give you another tidbit of example. These same guys, um, they offer me the first edition copy of Origin of Species. It was being sold, it's still being sold, I think, by, I believe it's Oxford. And Oxford was where Darwin, after he came back from his journeys in the SS Beagle, presented his theory of evolution at Oxford. And this was the first copy that was handed out to people in that lecture hall. And I'm like, you're telling me that you're selling in I think it's a Bodleian Library. They're like, why are they selling this? It's like, they need the money and they don't have the space. I'm like, you're serious? Oxford. Oh, yeah. Like, okay. It's crazy for me to think. I know everything's transitioning to digital, but it's like when when smartwatches came out, paradoxically, or most people didn't anticipate, um, traditional watches, luxury watches, going up in value. Secondary market and watches just skyrocketed. Why? Because I think we go back to things that remind us of how unique and of the past. Watches, the perfection of a perpetual calendar, and the complexity that goes into the watchmaking, the art of that is more sought after the more we advance technologically and we have all these sophisticated things. The nostalgia of something like a handmade watch to that level of perfection, a perpetual calendar that doesn't need to be adjusted for leap years, is fascinating with the moon phase. Same with books, right? You just encapsulate a piece of time. So I'm very, I'm very, I focus on the intention of what I want to collect. For books, is I want to collect pieces of books that the moment they saw the light of day, the world was never the same. I think the world was never the same after Harry Potter. The world was never the same after Origin of Species. Shackleton, the first maps that cartographers in Portuguese and Spanish and English expeditions, because it tells you how wrong these maps were. Like, I was offered one of the first atlases by a Dutch trading company, and you look at the world map and you're like, wow. At that time, they probably felt they'd figure it all out. And you look at the map of the world and it's so wrong, but it's beautiful because it reminds us of how quickly things change and how we think at every generation and every century, we think we're going to stop innovating, and yet we don't. And so that's my goal for the collection. It's very, at the moment, it's very focused on, I've collected rare books on Disney. Some of the first, like fantasy, I was signed by everyone that was involved in the first Disney movie. Looked at, things like that I love, like Orwell, 1984, which I think is very emblematic of crypto and, anti-establishment.
You got his, do you have like one of his first edition signed books or something?
Yeah.
That's pretty
1984,
cool.
Orwell
Wow.
first edition. Then I started venturing into like historical moments. So there was up for auction. It came a picture of all the dignitaries in the Berlin Conference, where kind of the European monarchs and diplomats met to basically split up the map of Africa, which is super impactful in a negative way that to this day has ramifications. And I thought, this is incredibly impactful at the world level, but I don't want that karma in my collection. It's like, so I try to stick to things that had a positive impact, like Theory of Evolution, and super impactful. So yeah, that's it's fun. I mean, I think I've collected more value wise. I maybe 1-to-1 books to NFTs actually, which
It's
is hard.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been to the Harry Potter museum in Tokyo?
Wait, what? I was just in Tokyo and I didn't.
What are you kidding me,
Oh
man?
my god.
Dude,
Wow, this
it is
is
huge.
shameful. Is it?
Yeah,
God, I gotta
so
go back.
my missus is a hardcore Harry Potter nerd, and she dragged me along and made me drink like butterscotch or whatever it was in the cafeteria. So yeah, so next time you're in Tokyo, definitely hit that up, man.
I need to go back immediately.
I think tickets are hard to get, so I think if you do, just plan it out.
Like everything in Japan, everything is good, like restaurants and stuff, you gotta wait.
Yeah. And just and if money wasn't an issue for you, what would be your dream punk? Do you think?
Well, if I say it, the buyer's gonna jack up his price.
You got your eye on it already.
There was a guy, actually, yeah, I was public about buying one with a wallet that was doxed, and he immediately knew who I was and started increase the price. And I was like, well, this is no fun.
Game theory, mate.
Yeah. I don't know. I think so I'll tell you ones that I have bookmarked. I like the white hair. I think it's just kind of like Crazy Scientist.
Cool.
Yeah. What's it? Wild hair?
The wild white. Yeah.
Yeah, wild white. I like that.
Yeah.
I like the aviator glasses too. Is it the aviator? The pilot?
The pilot glasses. Oh, the welding goggles. Oh, the pilot helmet.
Pilot helmet. I like that.
Yeah, they're cool.
I want to. This is an example of a punk that I want to like, but I don't. It's like the VR one. It's like I get it, BRAR AI, but I don't like him. but I've gone back and forth. That's when I'm on the fence. I guess it'd have to be there's another hoodie one that I'll buy at some point, and it's similar to mine. And the guy knows that I want to buy it, so I'm kind of a sucker. But I don't know. I'm also perfectly fine as is. I'm reminded that it's still a lot of money, and as I think I heard it from Robert Leshner, his founder of Comp, he said just one punk is enough. There's some beauty in just simplicity, but I have the good fortune of not having just one. What would be yours?
Um, yeah, I think you mentioned two of the traits, and I think there was a punk that actually owns it. His name's Sov Punk. So he's got an amazing collection of punks, just aesthetically too. He's got a lot, but he's handpicked these ones out. And there's one in there that is a wild white with VR goggles. Just that combination is just really really amazing. It'd be one of
Nice.
my favorite picks there as well. But I don't know, man.
It's an
I
interesting
love the music.
discussion because most I always the you it seems like you and I have thought about it in a similar manner, which is aesthetically what you like, and some other people, and I've appreciated this in the art world, buy because other people tell them that they should buy it. And I remember I found it fascinating to go to museums. You walk into the Louvre, in the in the room where the Mona Lisa is, most people don't care to look behind, and I find that painting behind it. So I think the Day of the Bastille, huge mural, beautiful, and I find that more interesting. But that's not what the art experts tell you. And I think art collecting is a fun sport and fun activity because it teaches you also so much about investing, which is very subjective. So everything's a social construct. Memes to fundamental investing, whatever. At the end of the day, it's a collection of opinions, and the market is sort of weighing them constantly. And art is very incredibly subjective, um, and people get. I'm not being critical, but sometimes I think I've gone at. My mom loved going to museums, and I still do. And you know, getting getting a guide to a museum is nice. It could be useful, but at some point, it could be. There's a fine line between being too opinionated, whereas telling people what they should be observing, what they should be appreciating, as opposed to giving them just a general understanding of what they're seeing and allowing them to discover. And I think everyone should allow themselves to discover what their tastes are, what they value, what they appreciate. Yeah, it helps when, the hoodie punk all of a sudden 5X and 4, you're like, oh, okay, it sounds like people like it. But I would have liked it anyways.
It's funny how they look a lot better once the price goes up or the floors go up.
They certainly don't look worse, I'll tell you that. But I do think that, like, as an example, I was in I think it was the Georges Pompidou Museum also in Paris, more modern art. And right next to the cafe on the fifth floor, there's a blue canvas, just blue, right next to the bathroom. So, it's like not super prime real estate, but it's prime real estate because it's a top museum in the world. And I remember I was like 15 years old or whatever when I first saw it. No, I was 12 actually. And I looked at it, I'm like, what? Like, I could do this. I could have done this. What makes it so special? And I constantly think of that. It sort of nags me. My sister's an artist. She paints. I'm like, well, some Barbara's paintings are probably better than this crap. But this is probably worth like 20 million, 50 million. I don't fucking know. It's crazy. And then, okay, well, you learn the history that this guy invented this tone of blue and yada, yada, yada. And you're like, yeah, but I still don't find it meaningful. You maybe walk around the streets and see an artist and find their art really nice. And so, I don't know. I think art is one of those things where sometimes we do things to impress people. Now I've come to a point in my life where I don't fucking care about impressing other people. I just want to do the things that I love, and if people find it interesting, great. If not, I don't fucking care, you know. But yeah, like now that I moved to Europe, I was living in San Francisco, and you start appreciating like these old collectors, right? Like they're buying, Banksy and all this stuff. And I've asked some of them, very high, I mean, people think the NFT market is big. I'm like, go look at a random Sotheby's auction on any given day, and they sell Monets and Picassos for 20, 30, 50 million like it was popcorn. No, we're nowhere on the finish line. It's gonna take time. But it's kind of a weird, funky world where I think a lot of people are buying it because they want to impress other people. They'll walk into their house and be like, "Oh, I have a Picasso. Do you actually fucking like it? Do you really? Do you find it aesthetically pleasing?" Some of these are like horrible. I'm sorry, art connoisseurs come at me, but I just no, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of very subjective.
It is one of those things. Everybody likes to flex a little, right? Get a little bit more socially
Yeah,
accepted.
yeah. And that's honestly, that's some of the criticism that I've gotten, truthfully, which is like, oh, you're making a very explicit statement that you could afford a PFP, a JPEG of 150K or whatever. That makes it very, and I'm like, I get it. I appreciate that. I'm not saying no. Everything's on chain, but yeah, I mean, I do it for other reasons, but again, you're never going to control what other people think about you, so don't even try changing their mind. You're never going to do it.
Who's your favorite punk personality, or do you have a series of punk personalities in the space that you like?
This is what I love about punks. They're so different. But collectively, I think we share common values, as you pointed out at the start of the pod. I do like my brother punk, 6529.
Yeah.
Is it 6529?
Yeah, it is
I always get
6529.
this number.
Yeah.
I'm always insecure about it.
He
Yeah,
drops
6529.
he's dropped so many
He's
wisdom.
people
Wisdom
at some point thought I was him, and I was like, oh, God, no, I'm not that thoughtful. He's in a league of his own, so I really find him very thoughtful. I think he was a evangelist for NFTs. I like him. I'll always be grateful to G Money for getting me back into the space and appreciating NFTs, and so he was instrumental in my journey. And yeah, probably those two are the ones that come top of mind.
Yeah, big names. And how would you describe punk culture for you, do you think?
I think it's a community that appreciates the origins of the space and what it means. But it also has maintained focus at a time where it's very easy to get distracted by many things, and a time and a space where many NFT projects started to want to build more, offer utility, roadmaps. I think there's something elegant and beautiful about the simplicity of punks, and that starts and ends the community of just appreciating what they are. And a lot of times it's not pretending to be anything other than what it is, which is it's a relatively rare early piece of digital art and that's it's good. It feels like most punk collectors, holders appreciate that, and certainly they've gone on and invested in other projects, no problem, but I think they've stayed true to the core and the identity of punks, and I think there's something really elegant about that simplicity, and I think that is shared amongst most punk collectors and holders, even though you've seen many maybe sell or newcomers, but I think generally most people feels to me like they understand what they're getting into, and what punks are, and what more importantly they're not, in a space that is easy to get pulled in a million directions.
Absolutely. What about V1 punks? How do you feel about them?
They came, wasn't it like some dev that like resurfaced them, and then it was Larva Labs that canceled the contract. I'm like spotty on the history,
Yeah.
but I remember there was a time where like they sort of like came to more attention.
Yeah, so I think it was just before Yuga took the helm. There was a dev, Frank NFT, he built a wrapper for the V1 punks, and basically a few of them started, all the OG claimers started wrapping them and being able to sell them, but also Matt and John did as well. And they basically wrapped them. They sort of said, don't buy these V1 punks, wrapped them, and then basically dumped it on the community, which wasn't great. And then they sort of apologized for it and gave it to charity, etc. as well. So I think it was like sort of a black eye. I think OpenSea also delisted them as well, right? So, but I think when Yuga came back in, they got sort of the DCMA notice unblocked, and they just let them do their own thing. So I think ever since that point in time, there's always been a little bit of conjecture around V1 punks and what they are, and what they sort of represent.
Well, what I say now might be stupid in 5 years, or V1 might be better than the current ones. But I think, no, I never paid much attention to it. I think for me, punks are the punks that you see on Larva Labs website and on chain. Um, at the end of the day, everything is a social construct, so most people seem to agree that it's V2, I guess, punks that are the punks, if you will, TM. Um, I don't know if you have a different opinion.
Yeah. Well, no, 100%. So I think like it's, I think you got to respect the artist's wishes. And I think there's elements of the V1 community feels a little bit grifty, in the sense of the way it's been sold and narrated. So, but for me, it just makes the punk story a lot more interesting. Um, it's one of those ones where, is the attention going to accrue to the collection for a long time? And I think one of these stories is just going to be part of that, right? So, yeah, positive, I think.
Yep, absolutely.
Um, what about the Yuga acquisition? How do you feel about that? Did you have a view or indifferent?
I'm not a huge fan initially. Care less now. Just felt like a consolidation of too many things, right? Because they have Port Apes, right? Is it selling out to a big corporate? No, I just felt that it was. I don't know. I think it was Yuga that then came out and talked more about openly about IP, right? And they were more flexible in IP usage and for punk holders. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yeah, that's
But I
right.
think after the acquisition, they were publicly saying that IP would be something they would be open to discuss and not enforce, and made it open for people, right? I believe. And this was something that at the time I was having a conversation with G Money, because he's obviously has the possibility. I mean, he's built a great brand himself through his Ape Punk. He's done partnerships with Adidas and many other brands. And someone like him, it's much more important. And I know that he was in discussions with these teams, and so from that perspective, I think Yuga has been quite good about thinking about IP and what that means for collectors and allowing them to have more degrees of freedom. So that's when I meant to say that initially I was a bit skeptical of what it would mean and the vision and whatnot. But I think they've been, from my vantage point, have been very, yeah, kind of like respectful. It's like we're buying this brand collection, but also remaining um, cognizant of not interfering, not trying to do much. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's, but maybe integrating them in their broader roadmap. I wouldn't be opposed to that. And more importantly, IP, right? I mean, I think it's important for a lot of collectors. So if you want to put your punk on whatever, then you're not going to have like a lawsuit on your hands, which, you know, um, is important for some people. So I think it's a welcome kind of move on their part. So I respect them a lot for that.
Cool. Well said. Um, and last question for the pod, Santi. If you could pass on a message to the next owner of your punk 9159, what would you like to say to them?
Oh, wait a minute. I was under the impression that we were gonna live forever and encapsulated by AI, so I never let it go, right? It's sort of the AI will. There's gonna be a brain of mine and an avatar that takes life and form
San-
forever.
Santi 2.0.
Exactly, right? I mean, probably a better version of me in an AI context, right? Um, it's something that, what is this Patek sort of refrain, which is you never actually own a Patek, you just take care of it for the next generation. Um, and I hope I'm taking care of my hoodie punk. It's keeping me warm for sure. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know what I'll do with it. Um, it's I don't know. It's an interesting question because it forces you to think about something that I thought I'd never let go of it. But at some point, I guess life comes to an end and you part ways. Or I don't think I'd sell it. I've sort of come to this idea that it's tied too much to my identity. I've asked G Money this too, and other collectors like, would you ever sell, like DC investor, like, what happens if you sell it? He's like, well, people rebrand it, and it has. What is interesting too about provenance is that you understand who's collected it, who's owned it over time, and that I think becomes quite interesting and has value in and of itself. I'm not saying people are going to want to buy my punk because I've owned it, and God knows, Brian, no one wants it. But just take care of it. I think these things are pretty nice because they it's helped me craft my digital identity in a special way, and I hope that whether it's my punk or another punk, that as trivial as it may seem, they allow yourself the opportunity to curate your digital identity and be thoughtful about it because it's a nice journey. Once I tweeted something that people really either loved or hated, which is, I guess, okay. But I think it's my grand thesis for NFTs is that crypto uniquely enables digital identity, and now we are looking at our. Now we're faced and our closet is empty. We need to dress up our digital identity, and it's a very fun journey because you can be very explicit in the things that you collect, in the intention that you have behind collecting, and crafting your digital identity. And part of crypto is beautiful because I've met so many people that I don't even know what they look, what they like. You sort of put aside some of these biases and naturally you have when you look at someone. Are they male? Are they female? Are they black or white? Hispanic? Caucasian? Whatever. It doesn't matter, right? And so you can put that aside because the mind naturally, I mean, it's sort of like primitive brain kind of stuff. And the nice thing about these digital communities is that, sure, the counter argument of that is like, well, I'm looking at someone that just dropped 150, 70K on a, well, that tells me a lot about this jerk. You're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, point taken. But I think that the NFT world will transition more and more to one of abundance and not of scarcity. Most of these collections have been 10,000 and there's this emphasis on scarcity. But I think the grand vision for NFTs is abundance, where there's millions and millions of these NFTs and you compose them, you mash them up to create what your identity is in the digital world, and it has digital scarcity and provenance. And that's really cool. And we move away from just thinking about floors and prices and more about abundance. And I think that mindset will become more and more prevalent in the NFT community, and deviating away from the original kind of Bitcoin conception of digital gold and scarcity, rooted in scarcity. And I hope that, yeah, it's kind of a really nice experiment that everyone hopefully allows himself to do. And I think more and more people will, because we like collecting and we like, as human species, social that we are, we always love to differentiate. If there's one stock that I would buy, none of this financial advice, is LVMH. Why? Because humans throughout history have always wanted to differentiate, and they do that in different ways. And NFTs are going to be that way in mass. And this thing is not even, it hasn't even started yet. You know what I mean? It's going to probably sound pretty crazy to think that we're just talking about punks. At the end of the day, there's going to be, I'm a NFT maximalist in the sense of we need more collections, and they're going to come through games and they're going to come through Web2 brands, and that's great, because at the end of the day, it creates this possibility for people to be very intentional in the identity, the things they collect, and also showcase them to the world. A lot of these collections in non-digital contexts are stored in vaults, and that's kind of a shame, right? These things are meant to be displayed, and that's the beauty of digital. And so I'm really excited about that. I think younger generations really get it, and you're seeing that.
Absolutely. Right. In other words, instead of buying LVMH, you should buy more punks. I don't think.
Yeah. A fractional punk, I only have so much money. Nah, yeah. I will be buying more punks for sure. I think it's something that once you buy one, it's like, all right, I want more.
Santi,
Yeah.
this has been a super fun conversation, man, and thanks for embellishing me with all of my noob questions. I've learned a lot in this session, and look forward to hearing you on more pods in the future. But I guess any closing comments from your side, and what's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, no, I think this has been a fantastic discussion. I really appreciate your thoughtful questions. We talked perhaps more about investing in NFTs, but that's fine. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully this was useful for people. Um, yeah, you can find me on Twitter, and I guess I do this podcast Empire, so that's where I live and breathe. But yeah, closing thoughts. No, just what I said earlier. Um, Never deprive yourself of experiencing or like trying new experiences. It's and buying NFTs. It's not about how much you spend. It's just be thoughtful and buy things that you like, and um, yeah, I think it's a great journey. And as I said, just going back to the overall message, I think you know it's important to be open about our mistakes because sometimes we self-select and we tweet only when you see the perfect outcome, right? Social media is really distorting in that sense, which is you sort of tend to think that most people are doing better than you because they're doing perfect things, and it's really difficult to see other people be successful. It is, and I think at some point, yeah, most people struggle with that. It's like they can't. It's not so much that they can be successful, but they really get distraught when they see other people be more successful. And somehow, I think we have to. I don't know. Allow yourself to change your mind and say win-win. You can win, and other people can win. And because other people win more, it's like who fucking cares, right? Go live your life and enjoy it. And the NFTs really are a reminder of that because they have a lot of social cachet and it's fun. And sometimes I think we deprive ourselves of having fun, and I think it's important to always have fun in the journey. So I'll part by just saying good luck and have fun.
Amazing. Guys, that wraps up another episode of PunkCast for the week, and we'll be back next week with another amazing punk. Bye for now.